Hello, my name is Tristan Armstrong, and this video is on the modern human's blue eyes and how they came to be and why they are so prevalent in European populations. For the first part of this slideshow, I will be asking the question, how did blue eyes originate in human populations? Because they are not actually innate. They are not something that we evolved with. They actually came afterwards and actually appeared much more recently than you would think. So in order to answer the question, where did blue eyes come from, we actually have to answer a few questions. First and foremost, we have to ask what caused the alteration in this phenotype, or the physical expression of the genotype. What caused blue eyes to appear? And the answer is mutations that occur when a strand of DNA is damaged, changed, or affected in a way that alters the message being sent or being carried by a DNA strand. There are several different ways that a DNA strand can mutate, but they're best summarized as deletions, insertions, and base substitutions. Deleting a base, or inserting a new base, or completely swapping out one base for another. This will affect and could drastically change the message that is being carried by a DNA strand that is most often detrimental to the human or organism that this mutation occurs in. There's also several ways that these mutations can come about. They can occur when there's errors replicating the DNA, or errors recombining the DNA, or even chemical damage from natural and man-made chemicals. These chemicals can damage this DNA and affect the message that it's trying to carry. Or something that we probably all think of but don't realize how drastic it can be is radiation, which you would probably think X-rays, of course, gamma rays also, but something that definitely slips most people's minds is UV light. The reason we wear sunscreen is to protect our DNA from UV light and from damaging that DNA. And this tells us how it can change. This tells us how our phenotypes can change, but what specifically needs to change in our DNA. And it would actually be on chromosome 15. There's a gene called OCA2 and a gene called HERC2, and they affect the pigmentation, with OCA2 producing the P protein, which is a key role in the maturation of melanosomes, which produce and store melanin, or pigmentation, and HERC2 controls the expression of that P protein, and it controls how that melanin is expressed in the phenotype. And so we now know what needs to change, but how long does it take for this to change? How long do we need to wait for this change to occur? Or, better said, what is the likelihood of this mutation? So there's a mutation rate of 1 mutation for every 30 million base pairs. Now there's plenty of base pairs on a single strand of DNA, and it's going to take a long time for one to make it through, because even though there can be this one mutation, there are checks and balances in the way that are trying to make sure that the correct message gets through. So there's no guarantee that this one mutation will make it through and will survive until the very end. So you have to be very lucky for this mutation to make it all the way through and actually affect that final message. That foundation established, we move on to the second part, which is why did blue eyes become so prevalent in a few limited European populations? And my original theory was this has to do with sunlight. Of course, it has to do with sunlight. And while I wasn't wrong per se, I also wasn't right, and we'll get into that. So when asking this question, why did blue eyes become so prevalent in these few limited European populations, we need to start pinpointing. We need to start laying out the dots and following them. The first dot we need to place is when and where did these blue eyes first appear. And while we can't really pinpoint the exact place in Europe, the exact location of this blue-eye gene, we know it was in Europe, and we know it was around 6,000 to 10,000 years ago. It is a fairly straightforward, cut-and-dry answer. There's no fancy interpretations of it, but it does appear like a big range when you look at our 100-year lifespans. It seems like a really wide range, 4,000 years. But in the long run of human evolution, this is a fairly short range, and it gives us a really good idea of when we need to be looking, especially looking at this period in Europe. So this leads to the next question. Why are they so prevalent? And it's kind of the opposite answer-wise. It's not cut and dry at all. It really has many theories behind it, and I'll be discussing two of these theories that I will say are probably the best contenders, with one being incredibly human and one being incredibly based in science. The first of which is going to be the human answer, and it's that this rare trait that was from this shared blue-eyed ancestor was physically attractive. This unique trait was attractive. Like we all know, Benedict Cumberbatch is by no means physically attractive, but because he's unique, he's attractive. And as a result, this sexual selection led to the ancestor having many children with this blue-eyed trait. And they may not have had blue eyes per se, because it's a recessive trait, but they were carriers. And these blue-eyed trait carriers went on to have more children, and it slowly spread thusly. Another theory, which is more rooted in science, and in my opinion, is likely the more possible answer, is that these blue eyes were not really what people were mating for. They were mating for that paler skin, because this was advantageous in Europe, where these short, cold days made it difficult for those with darker skin to get enough vitamin D. So it's not that they are mating for blue eyes. These blue eyes are not necessarily desirable. Like, it might be like, oh, he has blue eyes, but also his pale skin will let my children absorb vitamin D better than someone with darker skin. It doesn't matter about their eye color, really, in this case. And without fortified milk or vitamin supplements, which is something we have nowadays, sunlight was the only and best way to get vitamin D. Darker skin was advantageous in Africa. It was a hot weather adaptation, because it would protect yourself from the UV rays, the UV radiation, but it would let in a little bit of that vitamin D that was so necessary. But these short, cold days made it difficult, if not darn near impossible, for these people with darker skin to get enough vitamin D, and they very easily could have simply died off. And those with lighter skin, maybe not the lightest pale whitest snow skin, but they were able to get enough vitamin D to survive, and they would go on to have more and more children, and eventually that pale skin would have been paired with pale blue eyes, because there's a lot of shared overlap with pigmentation between hair and skin and eye color. And thus, that is the end of my video. Here are my sources, and thank you very much for watching.